email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Joining me on the podcast today is John Zahurancik. As president of the Americas at Fluence, John is responsible for go-to-market implementation and honing customer-centric solutions for customers in the region. Prior to this role, John acted as chief operating officer, where he directed the Fluence teams that create and deliver storage solutions and services to leading customers around the world. Working with progressive power system players, John and his team create valuable business use cases for grid-scale storage, educate storage users in those benefits, manage the deployment of new systems, and help service those systems throughout their complete life cycle. John, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, Clint. It's great.
You know, I like to start with some background if I can. I always think of the people that come on the show as really superheroes, and I want to kind of, every superhero has a backstory. So, you know, what's your backstory? How did you get into the, where you are today? It sounds like it was a not direct route.
No, I would say it's been a little bit circuitous. I think a lot of people have that kind of a story, but I came out of school with a degree in economics and then went to grad school in public policy, intending to be a Washington bureaucrat. I moved to Washington, D.C. with the full intention of working for the federal government and have spent my whole career in the private sector. So I guess my first step in that path is I didn't end up in the government. I ended up doing other things.
Is that a win?
I found. I think we're both happier, I guess is the way I would say it. I think it worked out for everyone. I ended up in the telecommunications and field when wireless and cell phones were booming and the internet age was coming and really everything was moving online. And so that was a great way to look at high growth businesses. And so I was doing a lot of help with forecasting market trends, looking at new product introductions, really understanding how communications technologies were moving and what that was changing in terms of business models for everything. And then by chance, working with some other people, I started to talk to folks that were in the electricity sector, which was a big consumer of telecommunications. And in many cases, we were seeing electric companies take the rights of way that they had and use them to put fiber optics in and kind of repurpose things they were already doing for themselves for telecom and begin to sell them to third parties and other customers. So I ended up joining a large electricity producer, the AES Corporation, and working on telecom. And just by being in a large electricity producing company, I eventually kind of picked up the electric and power sector a little bit by osmosis. And I think being around people all the time who were thinking about the electrical infrastructure. And I started to see some of the trends that we had seen in telecom moving their way into the electrical sector. And so that was really interesting to see that transition from one field to another, and started to work on a number of innovations in the electrical sector with communications first, but then moving into looking at electric vehicles and then kind of the last 15 years really been focused on large scale battery systems that can be attached to the power grid to bring more reliability, reduce cost, and kind of help foster this, more sustainable power sector overall, supporting renewables. So it's been really interesting. I've been in the middle of kind of the telecom transition and then now into the middle of the power and green energy transition. And that's been just phenomenal to watch the change.
And you were mentioning on off air a little bit that your degree is not actually engineering, right?
That's right. I work mostly with engineers or financial people. And, my whole career really has been around technical people. My degree in public policy was an interesting one because it was aimed at trying to take things that were expected to come from scientists and translate them for policymakers. And so, my background training was kind of in the idea of take a technical subject matter and make it digestible. And I found that translated to business very well. There's a lot of subject matter experts that are deep in either the technology or a regulatory process or something. And then you have to be able to take and translate that into a business concept that a business decision maker can look at and say, how does this affect what we're doing? And so that's really what I've been doing most of my career, is kind of that bridge in between the technical world and the, and the commercial world.
Well, on behalf of all engineers, let me apologize. Dealing with engineers as a non-technical person, I'm sure has its challenges. It can be a bit frustrating at times.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So what about Fluence? What do you guys do?
Well, Fluence is a great company. We're just about to have our 5th year anniversary. We are completely focused on making large format battery energy storage systems for use on the power grid. So we build and design and implement these very large batteries. And when I say large, I mean, collectively on the sort of imagine a Home Depot sized battery, if you will, that connects to the power system. And rather than building a new power plant, a new gas plant, a new coal plant, anything like that, we're building these large battery plants, and they work to stabilize the grid. They work to capture energy from renewables and others that produce only at certain times of the day and bring those to the other times that we need. So it's been a great complement to some of the aging infrastructure that we've had in power and the new influx of renewables. But that's essentially what we do. We look for ways to apply this battery technology to make the power system work better. We've been doing that in more than 30 countries around the world. We started in this very, very early and are the largest and the leader in this space.
Yeah, I watched a talk that you gave at an ESA conference back in 2017. It was on energy storage lessons. And first, a couple of things. First of all, I just want to say you're a great speaker. I mean, let me go ahead and throw that out there. I was absolutely mesmerized by your talk. Of course, as an electrical engineer myself, that's probably just the engineering geek in me coming out. But as someone who speaks a fair amount, which I do, I was really impressed by in your 25-minute talk. You almost never referenced your notes, and it was really, really very impressive. So kudos to you on that.
Well, it's, when you live it, it's sort of in your head. So I think if you're, we've had the great advantage here of really pushing the leading edge of this. And so that, that makes quite an imprint on you,
yeah,
I think.
For sure. And during that talk, you were discussing the historical perspective, which I also find interesting about energy storage. And you actually went all the way back to, I think, 1893, and you talked about
that's right.
the kind of the merger of, way back then, they still used batteries in cars and a certain amount of cars. And you kind of gave this analogy of along a timeline of pilgrims and pioneers and settlers, which was really interesting. And I'm just curious. So that talk was about 5.5 years ago. How much have things changed since then?
A good bit. I mean, I think the core technology are still similar to the core technologies, but their systems are getting bigger. The costs have generally been coming down. In terms of broad market acceptance, I think we moved from, hey, this looks like a new technology that might be interesting, to, hey, this is a technology that every power system should have a plan for incorporating. And so that's a big sea change. Back then, 2017, I think we were doing systems that were, the largest systems were probably 20 and 30 megawatts for 3 or 4 hours. And now we're doing things that are 100, 200, 300 megawatts for 4 hours, and some systems that are now moving to 5 and 6 hours. So, maybe 10x on the average size. And interestingly, people have become more conversant, right? And so, you pick up speed as these technologies become more commonplace. And so where we were doing maybe the first or second system for leading customers, those leading customers are doing their 6th or 7th or 8th system, and the kind of customers that weren't doing anything at that time are doing their 1st and 2nd and 3rd system. So really, really a sea change in people's outlook and expectation for energy storage to be a key part of the overall electric system.
Yeah, I didn't research this at all, but I recall, I think it was 60 Minutes or somebody, and they were talking about places like the Bahamas and with all the hurricanes hitting. And I think there were some of the stuff you're talking about was their solution, I believe, going forward.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of those, islands are a great example where historically they've had to rely very heavily on fuel oil for power. So relatively expensive and dirty, and because they have a small system, we have the benefit in the mainland US of, you can connect power systems to each other. You have lots of power generators. You have lots of ability to absorb change and variation over a large system. But when you get onto an island and you have a relatively few number of power generators, you have changes that could occur very rapidly, like in a storm or weather condition, that grid has to be very resilient, and resilient to just daily change as well as resilient to things like a hurricane or other. And so a lot of the islands are looking at how do we use battery-based energy storage systems to complement what's already there. A lot of islands are in situations where wind and solar power are very good fit for them, and they end up then not having to bring in any kind of fuel, whether it's oil or coal or gas. They don't have to import that, so it's a greatly reduced cost. And then they use the battery to complement it with kind of a firm, reliable source of power. And they're reducing their cost and they're reducing their emissions footprint overall. So it's kind of a win-win, and you get a more stable grid overall. So islands have been really one of the first places to look at energy storage.
Okay. So Fluence really, as I was doing research, seems to be kind of ahead of the curve consistently in working towards a more sustainable future. And I was wondering my sweet spot is talking about teams and teamwork and communications and things like that. Do you have any advice on how teams can be more efficient in driving innovation within their own teams?
Yeah, I think some of the things we've seen, I think you have to learn to cultivate problems, I guess, is one thing I would say for innovation. It's that phrase of problem is the mother of invention, or trouble is the mother of invention, And so I think looking at problems as an opportunity is one way for teams to cultivate it. And then the other is really just cross-functional teams, or just the more you can put people that don't naturally come into contact with each other, the better. So, and that's as simple as, do you have opportunities in your organization for people to talk to one another outside of a formal meeting, people that might not normally interact, because that's where you get this maybe cross-culmination, cross-cultivation of different ideas, where somebody that's working on maybe a financial problem and somebody's working on a technical problem, and you realize, hey, there's something here at this intersection. And, or you're working with a customer who's trying to solve something, and you're working on a product that you're trying to solve, but trying to see it from a different perspective a lot of times is really that source of innovation. So, it's how do you get different people into contact with one another in a productive conversation? And then do you create an environment where, people have time to sort of dream a little bit about what else could we do? So those are a few of the things that we try to do.
Okay. Now you work obviously in a very rapidly changing landscape within the energy industry. How does your team stay on top of client issues that need to be solved through your products and services? and how can those of us in the other industries kind of embrace that?
Yeah, I think it's a race. Honestly, we exist in an environment where the technology base is changing, right? We're seeing a lot of innovation in the physical technologies. Then we see a lot of change in the controls technologies. And then the customer cases are just continuing to emerge. So we've led a lot of the first business cases for energy storage, but as people are getting familiar with it, those are coming from lots of directions. And then the regulatory environment, because the power sector is, even deregulated pieces are fairly heavily regulated. And so you have, how do you interact with these technologies amidst the rules and the market structures and different things? So lots of change, right? Business case change, technology change, and regulatory change all occurring simultaneously. And I think where we've been is, in most cases, try to focus on fundamental value. Is there something you can do with this technology that really delivers a service? And so rather than focusing on the technology itself, how do we focus on what it provides? Does it solve a problem for somebody? Does it do something better than what we have today? And then how do we help our customer unlock that value, right? In some cases, it's working through a regulatory structure. In some cases, it might be adapting a technical solution. A lot of the first projects we did with energy storage, we really made a battery operate like a power plant. It's fundamentally not a power plant. It's not generating electricity from nothing, but you can take electricity in, and then the way you dispatch it, you can make it act just like a power plant. And you can even then refine the parts of a power plant you don't like as much. And so a lot of the jobs that we did originally and continue to do are ones with high variability that power plants don't like to do. You just think of any engine, any spinning, rotating mass, you'd like as an engineering group to kind of set it at its perfect optimal space. and just keep running it like that. Don't vary it at all, right? But that's not how the world works. You flip the lights on, you turn the TV on, you blend a milkshake, somebody goes into a factory and turns production on. It's a hotter day, you have more air conditioning load, so stuff changes all the time. The battery is really good at dealing with that change. It can absorb extra electricity, it can put electricity out. And so really looking at how do you solve a practical problem? Like, I think that's been the focus of our innovation. And amidst all of this change, we've sort of been able to focused a bit on a North Star of do something useful with technology. It's not technology for technology's sake. It's do something useful with technology that makes things better. And then we have to navigate the, business case, the financing environment, COVID shutdowns, the regulatory changes along the way. But if you're aimed at value, those other things tend to work themselves out. Eventually regulation moves towards that direction too, because they want to reduce cost to the customer. Suppliers tend to move towards value too. So something that didn't exist a few years ago is very commonplace now because we've kind of helped illuminate the case for those technologies to exist. So that's been the way we've done it. Focused on end value and then drive forward and let what comes around you come. But if you can keep your eye on that North Star, it helps a lot.
Yeah. So if I could think about what you guys do, then it's no different than if you have a Tesla cell or what do they call those, power walls, or, at your house where you're getting solar power and you collect it in your battery and then use it at night. You guys are doing something like that on an industrial scale. Yeah.
Like a utility scale, really. Yeah. If you think about your utility, wherever you exist, whatever the power company is, they're running power plants and they're having to put it over the wires. We're doing things with batteries at a scale that help solve those same jobs. So rather than building a new power plant, we build a battery. Rather than building a new transmission line, in some cases, we're able to put a battery in that alleviates a constraint, and you don't have to do all of that construction. Some of these things, power plants can take 2 or 3 years to build. It can take 5 years to permit. If you're doing renewables, a lot of times they're out in the desert or in the middle of nowhere, and then you have to get the power back. We can put these in the middle of a city block. They're innocuous. They don't make any noise. They don't have any emissions. They don't need to, have anything around them. You can do them very, very quickly. And so they've given a lot of flexibility to power planners and at the same time reducing cost for the whole system.
Yeah, I think, first of all, we got a power plant here in Georgia that's been way more than 10 years, not done yet. So,
yeah, exactly.
So, but I like the way you described it in one of your videos that I watched, which is you have to engineer your systems for the peak loads. And by putting these systems in places in certain locations, you can alleviate having to do that where they can become the peak, right? When it spikes, they can take over that.
That's right. Yeah, and instead of having plants that only exist to run at peak, which is, a big part of the power plant fleet, exists only for sort of the hottest couple days of the year, the battery can be used economically every day of the year and also cover that peak. So it's kind of like what we saw. It's not exactly the same, but in the telecom world, we saw new technologies that came in and allowed us to pack the line. So instead of having a circuit switch technology where if you dial, I call you and I occupy that line, even if we sit there silently, right? We basically consume the resource. Then people came up with time division and they came up with packetization and they came up with other things where we can use that same physical hardware much more intelligently and we get a huge benefit out of it. That's similar to what we're doing. We're giving the efficiency control optimization through the battery to the power grid to do the same jobs it needs to do, but more effectively, really.
But I think about it, if I understand the cable industry correctly, back in the old days, they basically sent every channel to your TV set, right? And then they got smarter and said, no, let's only send certain ones, or only when they request it will we send it. So if you're getting the same pipe, you're getting more stuff down it or more effectively.
Yeah, in all those industries, it became about utilization, right? Can we find ways to, whatever we have to pay for as a society, whether it's the power infrastructure, the phone infrastructure, roads, the more we can get utilization out of it, the average cost of it is just lower. And so a lot of this is about utilization of the power infrastructure, right? And then obviously there's been a big change. Like you talked about the last 5 years. I mean, 5 years ago, we didn't really see solar and wind being the low cost sources of electricity. And today they are, right? So there's been a huge economic change in what we expect to be the source of power generation. And those are different than gas plants, coal plants, anything else. And so you have to deal with different characteristics. The batteries are perfectly suited to complement a renewable future. It's a kind of a, hand in glove kind of situation.
Yeah, I think one thing, and we'll get back into the main part of the interview, but
sure.
I mean, I'm an engineer, so this is all, I'm geeking out on you here, but one of the challenges I think we have with electrical transmission is, one, the loss along the lines. And then, as your friend put it to you, energy doesn't like to be stored.
Exactly.
So those are kind of the two challenges y'all are having to overcome, right?
Yeah. And I think, one is to try to make things closer so you don't have to transmit as much. And so that's one of the things you can do. And, the other is, hey, how do we deal with storage? We've been developing more and more capabilities. I mean, just think about the number of batteries that you use in your life on a daily basis, that's pretty prevalent. We just said, let's put these together on a massive scale and use them, for the power system, as well as all the other things that we use batteries for. So it wasn't an original idea in the sense that, like that article you mentioned back to 1893, in the first power systems, they thought, oh, well, there's going to be a power plant and it doesn't run all the time. And then we need a battery to store some things, and then we need to distribute to people. At the time in 1893, the batteries just didn't really stand up to what's needed. So 30 years later, here we are. And, we're basically coming back to that original vision, but the technology is much more advanced to accomplish it.
Yeah, for sure. We kind of touched on this one already, but you kind of are an innovator. If I think back to, I think you had a previous company that you were doing this with. How do you encourage your teams to be pioneers within this business? Is it just execution you guys focus on now, or is it also development as well?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do the project development work, but we do development of technologies and other things. And I think our role is really seeing the application of technologies. But a lot of this is, when we recruit people, we look for folks that can come and, we have 4 values in our company that we thought a lot about: leading, agile, responsible, and fun. One of the elements of being leading is, you got to have people that have courage, and you got to create an environment where folks are willing to kind of lean forward into something. We use a lot of analogies, like imagine you're walking into the heaviest wind you can ever manage, and you have to really lean forward into the wind to keep moving forward. And if the wind falls down, you're going to fall over, right? That's kind of the feeling you should have working in our company. You should be pushing that far forward such that you're going to fall down if the wind stops. And I think some of it's creating an environment where people understand, hey, we are pushing this forward. We have a vision that's ahead of folks, and we want people that bring that courage of being willing to fail, like evaluate the idea, have wide discussions about it, but then we've got to move forward and then learn quickly where things didn't go well, pick it up and do the next. But it's a lot about cultivating courage, cultivating an attitude of living up to the idea, I guess.
Right. So I was thinking LARF, LARF, right?
Yeah.
Probably everything's an acronym in engineering worlds, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So I was curious if you have an example of a high stakes project that you guys are working on that kind of got off track, and how'd you solve that issue that you were having, and what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, like being at the front edge of this technology, I think we've had that experience quite a lot. And, when I talk to partners that we work with, I think we are honest to say we don't have every single answer. We will find things together because stuff is continuing to move, but we will stick with you to get through the answer. And I think there's a commitment to figuring it out and resolving it where we don't know things. So we bring a lot of experience, but we all recognize we're kind of moving a frontier. And so we need to keep doing that together. We've had things that come on technical challenges, things that come on commercial challenges. I would say when I think about a common theme of how you dig out of a really deep problem, it almost always ends up being the people that are involved that become the solution. So, do you have the right people involved, right, is one thing. Are they focused on it? So in a lot of cases, I think it's maybe bringing those collection of people together and really saying, hey, do we recognize that we have a problem? Are we in this deeply enough? And do we understand which problem we're solving? Because sometimes you find in some of these things, we found Sometimes the regulator has one problem and the customer has a different problem, and our engineers have another problem, and the sales guy has a different problem, and everybody's running around knowing there's a problem, but you may not know which problem each person thinks they're solving. So, by bringing key people together, and, in today's world, you can do it easily remotely, but I mean, even there's still some magic to being physically together at times. I think that get people just their full attention on, hey, do we know what this is? Are we focused on what the reality of the situation is? Not what we wanted it to be, not what we hope it'll be, but what's the reality of the situation? And then what are our best ideas for working through this? And sort of that very close collaboration. You have to have people that have deep ownership. If it's a difficult problem, I mean, if it's an easy problem, you probably should have solved it anyway. Like some of that, right? But if it's really a difficult problem, you need folks that are deeply committed to getting to the end solution, not just committed to one part or one piece or explaining something, but really, do you have some people in that process that are committed to getting to the end answer, whatever it takes? So we use that phrase a lot, like, whatever it takes. Like, what are we going to do? Right. Like, if you're an engineer, great, but the problem might be financial. Are you willing to learn something and bring something and ask questions until you understand it? Really seeking people that are, the goal is the success at the end. It's not the bits and pieces of the parts. So I think, to me, that's been the biggest thing. When we've had a problem, it's usually been people are too distracted, or they don't have a commonly aligned set of objectives of where we're going. Maybe they're optimizing for some part of it, and because that's their part, they're not really thinking of the whole. But a lot of it just comes down to great people. I mean, we've had a lot of great people here who have been willing to learn. Part of great people, in my definition, is that they have enough humility to understand they don't know everything. And even if they have the greatest answer in the world, if it doesn't fit the problem, then you got to have the humility to change directions, and set aside something that you might have worked really hard on, and it might be great, but it just doesn't suit, or it doesn't work, or it's not emerging. So like that combination of the intensity around wanting to succeed and having kind of the personal humility to subsume, your identity into the group success. I mean, those seem to be real key things to me.
Well, as an engineer, I'm happy to help you fix your financial issues because that's a math problem. But when it comes to marketing, I'm running from the room screaming because I don't speak that language at all, right?
What's funny that you say that is when we first started to do this business, we had to do a lot of communications with folks, and we just kept realizing, my gosh, we keep over-engineering our communications. You'd get into something and you'd just be grinding it to some very specific endpoint. And it really took us a lot to step back and say, okay, I think we need to sacrifice some precision for some understanding. You can't approach communications the same way you approach a technical problem.
Yeah, I see that same thing in project management. With in your day job, if you're building a bridge or designing a bridge, then probably 4 or 5 decimal places of accuracy is important.
Right.
But in project work, you just got to get the ball rolling in the right direction to keep it out of the ditch,
right.
Really. And so that's the same thing. We don't need that level of accuracy.
Yeah.
And sometimes as engineers, as technical people, we get locked in. We want to focus on the perfect answer, and we need to be getting something done instead. So
yeah, I agree with you. And there's a power to momentum, right? I mean, I think we all see that. So, standing around, you can easily get locked in that analysis mode that just doesn't let anything move. And sometimes just a little bit of momentum actually unlocks a much better solution.
Yeah, avoid analysis paralysis, right?
Yeah.
So that actually segues perfectly into my next bucket of questions, which is around communication. You're talking about the finance person has a problem, but so does the salesperson, so does the engineer, and they're all trying to solve, they think the same problem, but they're different problems. And I'm just wondering, how do you, and I think you kind of answered it with you had to bring people together to collaborate, but what role does communication play in being successful in that environment?
I mean, I think it's critical. I mean, the number of problems that I've seen that are really just people talking past each other is amazing, right? And sometimes when you stop and just kind of repeat back what somebody said, and they go, well, no, that wasn't what I meant. And I said, well, those are the exact words you used. You find a breakthrough. And so I would say it's it's very high, and everything we work on is complex. It's not something that one person can do on their own. And so by nature, you're going to have a collaboration of people and across disciplines. Even within the same discipline, like engineers, you have lots of different types of engineers, and somebody's focused more on how do we meet this particular regulatory requirement, and somebody else is focused on how do we make the machine work, and those are different specialties, different bodies of knowledge. And so I think that communication is really, how do we develop a common language that allows us to talk, right? And I laugh sometimes. I mean, from the projects world, I used to joke that, somebody on the project needs to speak the good old boy language of whatever place you are, and whether you're in Georgia and it's real good old boy, or whether you're in New York has another version of good old boy, and California has another version of good old boy. And it's kind of like, do we understand what people are saying, really? And some of that is real active listening, more than talking sometimes. And then what I was saying, like I was just on a call yesterday where we were going loggerheads on a problem. And one of the techniques I think that's sometimes helpful is, hey, let me say back what I think you just said to me. Like, this is how I'm understanding you. Tell me where I'm missing something. And even that act of stopping sometimes lets you hone in, because generally you're working with people that are smart. If they're struggling with a problem, it means they care about it. And so if you have smart people that care about getting something done, most often I would say the barrier is communication, right? We're talking past each other, or we're not understanding what part of this is important to you, or why are you getting stuck at step A and I'm already on step 37 or something, and we don't understand why that's happening. So to me, it's critical. That's a lot of team formation. It's not about being right. It's about how effectively can we work together to overcome whatever challenges come.
Yeah, I liked what you said about talking kind of across purposes, and then saying, let me repeat back what I heard. I do a lot of global projects, and I'm on one right now where the lady in Singapore does an excellent job of this. She will talk to her and she'll say, okay, let me repeat back what I think I heard. And she does it, and this is so powerful, right? And she's doing it because English is a second language, but you're saying we should do it even on regular teams where we all speak the same language.
Yeah, and one of the things I also find is people communicate at you and then assume that you agree, right? And because I've told you something, doesn't necessarily mean you're bought in and we're working together. It just means I told you something. And so there's a big difference, I think, in success between, did I tell you something and I don't know where you stand and I'm just hoping you agree, or did we actually communicate and we're on the same page and we know we're going towards the same thing?
Yeah, I think maybe I'm jaded as I get older, but I agree with you on that. And I think that you see people kind of default to what I call it. So it's asynchronous communication, right? Where I send you a text message, I send you an email, I post something on Slack or Jira, maybe I'll leave you a voicemail, because what I'm really hoping is I don't have to talk to you. That, I want to check this off my to-do list. Yeah. And if I actually have a conversation with you, I might find out that's not what you wanted done. Now I've got to go do something else. And I don't want that, right?
That's
so I want to check it off my list. And so I'm a huge fan. That when I opened this podcast with the quote from George Bernard Shaw that says, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it is taking place, right? So that's kind of what you're talking about.
That's right.
So for me, it should be about a conversation, right? And so I think about the game we played when we were kids called Telephone, where, the first kid whispers a secret to the second kid, who then whispers it down the line. And by the time the fifth kid whispers a secret, it's not remotely close to what the first kid said, right? Because what we do, and this happens in the business world as well, we receive our message from you. Let's say you send me a text message or an email. I receive that information through my own filters, my own biases, the way that I define terms, the way, even if I'm having a good day or a bad day, I might receive it differently. And so it's not surprising that the message gets mangled as it gets twisted each time each person interprets it and passes it on.
Right.
But when you have conversations, which is what you were talking about just a minute ago, where you're repeating back, here's what I heard. Now, when the first person tells me this sort of secret, I can go back and say, wait a minute, when you say turn left, do you mean like right now at that driveway or at the next intersection? We can ask those clarifying questions so the message gets received in the way in which you intended it, and then it should get passed on throughout the organization. So I think that's spot on to what you were saying. So
yeah, and I think it's funny. One of the 3 or 4 books that I always ask people to read when they join Fluence is around communications. It's I love the Heath Brothers books, and Made to Stick to me is one of the greatest communications books I've ever read, because it really talks about, people have different styles of communication. They have different filters by which they interpret it, like you're saying. And it really argues towards speaking in much more concrete terms than a lot of us typically do, because that's kind of a base default language. But even there, every group has to find its language, its common language, especially if you're doing stuff that's under pressure or things that are high stakes, but, complicated. You have to find your common language.
In your world, have you found a communication style that you think works best for you in your organization?
I mean, personally, I just try to communicate all the time. I mean, I think it's the more open you can be with information, the better. I think the more you can arm people throughout all the layers of the organization, wherever they are, with what are we trying to do? What are some of the obstacles? Here's a lesson. Here's a story that we just went through. The more you can get that to stick in people's minds, they get the benefit of what everyone else has done. So I mean, in terms of style, I would say we try to be as open, as transparent as we can. Try to get as much information as you can to people. And that, it's tricky because you also have to translate the event, right? You can't just literally tell everyone the thing. You have to kind of give them some context. You have to communicate on what's going on. But most people want to do a good job, is what I find. And their barrier is they may not know exactly what a good job means. Like, what does that mean today in this context and what we're trying to do? How do we balance various things that are conflicting, right? The project team wants to do this, but the financial group wants to do that, or the supplier's sending us this and the regulator's doing that. There's not one simple answer to all those things. And so you have to think, and the more you try to understand what we're trying to do overall, the better you're able to make a decision. And the more we can push decisions down to the edge and to people throughout the organization but having a similar viewpoint, I think, the better you're able to rapidly resolve things that might trip you up.
Right. So how do you find yourself adapting to other people's communication styles? If theirs is different than yours, do you force them to take yours on, or how do you resolve
You
that?
should probably ask the people that work for me. Maybe it'd be better. But no, I think it's a combination. Certainly I have a way I like to receive information and the way I process information. When I do work with new people, I try to give them some insight into, hey, this is the best way to present information to me, and so that you're more likely to be successful. And in fact, I tell new people, hey, here are 3 or 4 people that work with me frequently. If you're getting frustrated with how this is going, go talk to them. They'll give you some insight into working with me. That's one tip for you. Another is I will try to adapt to understanding, how do you like to receive information, or how do you deal with things? And some people, they'd rather get something in writing, have a moment to process before you talk about it. Other people, they'd rather you drop it on them and at a high level and let them digest it for a while and then come back to details. Other people want to drive to the end conclusion right in a meeting. And I think you have to be cognizant of that, and cognizant of where your communication style is getting you tripped up, where you are saying something. And, again, I come back to that Made to Stick. They have a great example in that book of, if you sing a song in your head, sing the Star Spangled Banner in your head and tap it out with your finger. If you just tap it out, you think you're hearing the music to that tapping. The other person's just hearing you tapping on the desk. They don't have any idea what song is playing in your head. And I think that's a lot of times what we miss. So, it depends on the people. With people that I work closely with, I try to understand the kinds of things and the kinds of words that I use that click and the ones that don't. I try to understand a little bit of where they're coming from and what are they dealing with all day long that is kind of their mode of operation, so that we can either describe the things we're doing in terms of that, give it a better context, or even just understand where there might be thing we're talking about is really different than what you're talking about. Here, let me make sure we understand the big key gaps so that we're not missing something that just doesn't fit in your world, but it fits in my world. And then we've brought in over the years a series of new executives. I deal with key leaders at other organizations and the companies we work alongside of with as supply partners and companies we work alongside as the end customer, and trying to understand more about who they are, where they come from, how they communicate, I think is almost always paid dividends in that when you do get into a true crisis moment or you get into a really tough moment, you've laid a foundation of being able to actually have a discussion about the topic, as opposed to we're having a discussion about having a discussion because we don't really understand one another, I think some part of that is, are you willing to argue? Are you willing to have an honest argument with somebody? Can you do it in a way that doesn't destroy the relationship when you have a very different point of view? I think to me, that's a test of whether you have good communication. If you can have a good argument, even, without sort of walking away hating each other, I would say at the end of it, it's an argument of the merits.
Well, you created quite the environment if your subordinates are willing to argue with you.
Well, they are, and some of that is who you pick too, right? The other thing you find is you can create that environment, and not everyone appreciates it too.
Yes, especially if their experience has been something different, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great example. If their experience has been different, where they've been in an environment where they say, hey, conflict is bad. Why is this going on? We live in an environment where we try to sort of stir up conflict. And we've looked at it if there's no conflict with as much change as we're dealing with, like I said before, technological change, business case change, regulatory change. If we don't have conflict, we're probably missing something because there's just too much changing too rapidly. If we all just spontaneously agree on everything, we probably aren't really having a deep enough conversation.
Yeah. It's also if your past experiences that you were told conflict was good, but then it was held against you in the end, I'm also not going to say anything, right? If you shoot the messenger,
that's right.
You're not going to shoot me twice, right?
Yeah, and you have to prove to people that you're trustworthy, right? Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to, do you have an environment where your goal is really to ultimately succeed together? And you get people all with that same sense, then they're willing to take a risk and throw something out that they might not have, or challenge something that they might not have. One of the things that we talk a lot about on our teams is, I don't like to lose. However you define losing, I just don't like it, right? Whether it's not getting something done or, the way my motor ticks, I like to get things done. And then, I make lists, I like to check things off. I don't like it when you can't get something done, and right. Thinking that somebody in my organization had a better idea or had a way to get around this problem, but they were worried about talking about it, drives me crazy, right? Hey, we failed at something, and somebody says, yeah, I didn't think that was really going to work. Oh my, that's the absolute worst to me. I can't work with you anymore, right? I just, if you thought that wasn't going to work and you didn't have a conversation with me to keep me from running off a cliff, how am I gonna depend on you? I need you to tell me you think I'm running off a cliff. I might disagree, right? And I might still run off a cliff, but at least I want you to tell me, hey, watch out. I think you're about to run off a cliff. Don't do that. And, let me at least make the choice, right? But that's a piece of fostering that kind of level of, I don't know, commitment, trust, ownership, willingness to engage. That's what I said, willingness to argue, right? It's not always fun, but do you care enough about this to actually want the outcome to be good, even if you have to push for it?
Yeah, I think in project work, that's one of the things I always say is, I understand there's going to be bad news, and I'm okay with bad news. What I'm not okay with is bad news that you've known about for 4 or 5 months, and I'm just learning about today.
Yes. Yeah, that's tough.
The other thing I think that you said that really resonated with me is you surround yourself with good people, which I think is good. And one of the things I also truly believe, and maybe that's just the optimist in me, is I do believe people want to do a good job. I get questions in the class a lot of times on, we talk about duration estimating, for instance, on a task.
Right.
People say, well, how do you stop people from sandbagging? And I'll be honest, in my 30 plus years of doing it, you're much more likely to find somebody who's overly optimistic than somebody who sandbags. Because I think most people want to do a good job.
Right.
They want to go home at the end of the day, say, I feel good about the work I did today.
Yeah, I think that's true, and that's been my experience too. You find the rare individual that's got some other thing going on or some other goal, but for the most part, people want to do a good job, and our experience has been they want to be part of a successful team that does good work, and they want to be proud of what they did.
Absolutely. That's what we all want, right? So as I wrap up, I'd like to ask 3 questions.
Okay.
Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
I mentioned the Fluence values. I've been really fortunate to work at AES and then at Fluence, where both were very values-oriented companies, and values were much more than things that somebody wrote up once, stuck on the wall or something like that. They actually are very meaningful in terms of not just what we want to do, but what kind of a organization and person do you want to be as you go along doing it. And so that to me is something that's important. And I think the values that we defined at Fluence resonate well with me. I think they kind of fit overall with the idea of having ownership and pride in your work. Do a good job. I would say my grandfather always said, always do more than somebody thinks they're paying you to do. It's just sort of like the pride of accomplishment. So I think that's one. And then the other is I've been seeing over and over, just, value people, right? People have something to contribute, and if they're not contributing well, it may be that they're in the wrong spot. It may be, they're playing out of position or something, but take the time to kind of value people and understand where they come from. So those are ones that end up guiding a lot of my thoughts and day-to-day behaviors.
I agree with both of those. That's great. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I had a good friend and a guy I was working with one time. He said, just commit fully and be all in. He's like, that's what you need to do. And I realized at the time, I thought I had been committing and that I was all in, but I also was, I think, sort of had a half a foot out. And I think that's what he was seeing. And he sort of said, well, if you're all in and it doesn't work, you take the experience and you go do something else. So what? It's not the end of the world. What are you hedging your bets for? If it doesn't work and you weren't all in, you'll always wonder, was it because I didn't really give it my all? And so that's been liberating. I didn't really think I was doing that, but in a lot of ways it's just been liberating. If you're going to be here and do this, be all in on it. Try to make it work. And if at the end of the day it doesn't, I've always found the things that haven't worked have been great springboards to the next thing. There's a lot of learning that comes from failure, and it's not always fun in the moment. But it's been reused a lot, and it ends up being kind of a foundation for the next success in a lot of ways. And so I think that, instead of being in your head and wondering, is this going in the right direction? Am I in the right job? Is my career going the right way? Is this really the right company? Is this, you can play that game. Oh, other people are switching jobs. Shouldn't I be switching jobs? The economy seems great. Salaries are going up. You can just paralyze yourself out of effectiveness, and you rob yourself of a lot of joy. If you're going to be someplace, be all in and just enjoy what you can of it. If it's so miserable, then go somewhere else. Don't be half in a miserable place. Be out of it. It's all in or all out. It's sort of, I think that's the best advice I've ever gotten.
I think those could probably lead to a lot more successful marriages than either all in or all out. And if you listen more than you talk, the other thing you said earlier.
Yeah, I think that's true.
All right. Last question is, what is the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
Let me see what I've read recently. I've been reading this book on salt, the history of salt, the condiment, that we use it now. And I've just found it fascinating because it goes way back in history, and you realize for a long time, people were really, having a difficult time getting something that we kind of take for granted now. And all of the innovation in technology, in shipping, in financial, like a lot of this financial futures stuff started to come out of these commodities back in like the 12 and 1300s, like, whole empires. We talk about the Celtic people. That's a shorthand for the salt people, because they were salt miners. Like, I never knew that. So like, just the idea of some of these things that we are so common have had so many periods of innovation around them, to me is inspiring. I work on stuff where the technology is moving fast and those kinds of things, but innovation occurs in all kinds of things, and it can occur in something as basic as salt, right? And we've seen things like that. And even looking at the Civil War, one of the deficiencies the South had was they didn't have salt mines, right? And so they were constantly short of the ability to preserve food and even feed their soldiers. And so, like, you don't think about these things. They're sort of in there. So I don't know, it's been fascinating to me to think about kind of the common things around you that still have a whole life of innovation that we kind of take for granted.
So I see history is a passion.
History is a passion.
I noticed that in the talk I referenced earlier, you had the history of batteries and now the history of salt.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, John, this has really been great. I really appreciate you being here today. Thanks for the conversation.
Really great conversation, Clint. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.